Namaste, good morning, and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritang Jagarbhavasa Deha Pashamidrisham Yapitam Swalilaya Chayena Divya Jivanam Yapitam Swalilaya Chayena Divya Jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishnam Ishwaram. Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatar Varishtaya Chate Namaha. We salute Sri Ramakrishna, God of gods and Lord of existence, who of his own free will took on human birth and lived a luminous life of divine play for the destruction of human ills. We salute that incarnation, Paramahamsa Ramakrishna, who was worshipped by pure-hearted disciples like Vivekananda, and who was ceaselessly served by Sri Sarada Devi, the Divine Mother herself. Om Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatam Bhuvi Grinandiye Bhuridajana. O Lord, your nectar-like words are praised by the wise and full of auspiciousness. They destroy the curse of evil, bring good to those who hear them, and bring new life to those who are scorched by the ills of worldly existence. Magnanimous indeed are they who spread your message. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning we will continue with our study of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and we are on Monday, December 17th, 1883, the very beginning of that day, and is found on page 346. So because it's the beginning of a new day, we will just begin with the reading. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning. Sri Ramakrishna was in his room Sri Ramakrishna was in his room with M when Dr. Madhu arrived and sat down beside the master on the small couch. He was an elderly man and full of wit. He used to visit the master when the latter felt indisposed. So here the only thing really I wanted to, or would like to say is, for those who are not from India, that India being a tropical country that gets very hot during the day for much of the year, at least 6 months of the year, it's very hot during the day. People in India tend to be early risers. And so it would not be uncommon for somebody to travel from Calcutta and get to Sri Ramakrishna's room by 8 o'clock in the morning. I was quite surprised the first time I went to India in 1971. And I was just there for 28 days, and my trip had been planned so that I could see a number of things during those 28 days, which meant a good bit of travel. And so I was often coming into a train station in the early hours of the morning and being driven by taxi in the still dark of the morning to places like Belur and seeing people up and about already, starting their morning's business before the sun was even up. And so that here people get up that early only if they have a job which starts very early in the morning. but in India, it's quite common to get up the country wakes up early in the morning. The master. The whole thing in a nutshell is that one must develop ecstatic love for Satchidamanda. What kind of love? How should one love God? Gauri used to say that one must become like Sita to understand Rama, like Bhagavati, the Divine Mother, to understand Bhagavan, Shiva. One must practice austerity as Bhagavati did in order to attain Shiva. One must cultivate the attitude of Prakriti in order to realize Purusha, the attitude of a friend, a handmaid, or a mother. So here, Sri Ramakrishna, again, addressing his words to Dr. Madhu, who had just come in, and says that one must develop ecstatic love for Satchidananda. So here he doesn't mean Brahman, because as I've said on other occasions, one doesn't practice devotion to Brahman, because there's no relationship within or with Brahman. Brahman is the one without a second, the non-dual reality, in which there is no distinction whatsoever. So who is to be devoted to whom? In Brahman, there is no world. In Brahman, there is no jiva. In Brahman, there is only the non-dual, silent reality, ever shining, ever resplendent, ever perfect, ever blissful, but no relationship. And so one doesn't practice devotion to Brahman. So here when he says one must develop ecstatic love for Satchidananda, he means Satchidananda Krishna, Satchidananda Kali, Satchidananda Shiva. And that becomes clear in what he says in the rest of the paragraph. He says, what kind of love? How should one love God? And so then he mentions Gauri. Gauri was one of the Pandits who declared Sri Ramakrishna to be an incarnation. That is, when Sri Ramakrishna was still in the sadhana period, still practicing spiritual disciplines, and the Bhairavi Brahmani came to Dakshineshwar as one of Sri Ramakrishna's gurus, and a very important guru. She was the one who led him through the Vaishnava practices and the Tantric practices. So she was critically important in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, but she right away began to claim that Sri Ramakrishna was an incarnation. Mathur Babu thought that she was going to turn the head of the young Bhattacharya, that is the young priest. Mathur Babu had great devotion for Sri Ramakrishna, great appreciation, but he didn't see Sri Ramakrishna at that point as an incarnation. He saw him as a great soul, but thought that even his head could be turned if people go around calling him an incarnation. And of course, that's a legitimate concern if it had not been about Sri Ramakrishna, because one sees that even great people, their heads are turned if they attain to public fame and begin to have many people praising them. It can turn the head even of a great person. But Sri Ramakrishna, of course, was beyond that. So the Bhairavi Brahmani had Mathur Babu invite great pundits to come and listen to her arguments in favor of Sri Ramakrishna being an incarnation. So one of the pundits, there was Vaishnav Charan, but Gauri was one of the great pundits of the time who came to see Sri Ramakrishna and was quickly convinced that he was an incarnation. And after that, he used to come sometimes just to see him. So Gauri said that one must become like Sita in her one-pointed love for Rama. That's the way that we must love God. So Sri Ramakrishna says that we must be like Sita to understand Rama. We must be like Bhagavati, meaning the Divine Mother, in order to understand Shiva. And then he says that just as Bhagavati, the Divine Mother, practiced austerities in order to win Shiva, so we must practice sadhana, practice austerities in order to realize God. So of course, the story of Shiva is that the Divine Mother wanted to marry Shiva. And Shiva was the primordial ascetic, he represents Brahman, whose mind is absorbed in the reality and bliss of his own being, who has no need for any relationship, no need for anything. So the Divine Mother, and of course this is story, it's mythology, but it holds a deep truth within it, and that's what mythology is meant to express deep truths through the medium of story, because the story attracts the mind in a way that philosophy by itself does not. So the Divine Mother practiced severe austerities, doing japa in ice-cold mountain streams for the whole day, and many other austerities she did, until she was able to attract the mind of Shiva. So there are two things pertinent here that we can get from that. Other things also, of course, but two things we can get from this here. One is that everything can be attained through tapasya. That's one of the ancient ideas in the Hindu tradition, going back to Vedic times, that everything is possible through tapasya properly performed. And so Brahma himself, the creator, when he comes out of the lotus that grows out of Vishnu's navel, the lotus bud opens, and again, yes, this is story, but it's a beautiful image. The lotus opens and Brahma, the creator, is seated there. Then he is to create the world. So he practices intense tapasya to gain the power to create the world out of his own mind. Each one of us creates a whole world at night when we dream. Even those who think, well, I have no power of visualization. You haven't awakened the power of visualization, but it's there because if you dream, that is your own mind that is creating a whole world full of characters and full of a storyline. Sometimes it may look ridiculous from the waking state standpoint, but within itself, it's consistent. And so your mind creates this whole world. So Brahma creates this whole world, which lasts for billions and billions and billions of years, creates it in his own mind. So to get the strength to create with all of the infinite diversity of this world, create this world with its infinite diversity, its infinite number of beings and all of the things going on in all of the galaxies everywhere within the universe, in order to create this universe and sustain it within his mind for billions of years, Brahma practices austerities. So again, the idea is that through austerity doesn't mean punishing the body. It's not the same as the concept of mortification of the flesh in Christianity. Here, austerity is what was the root meaning of the English word asceticism. Asceticism comes from the Greek word. The root of asceticism is Greek. And there, asceticism was what the athletes practiced in order to compete in athletic competitions, like the ancient Olympics. And so that's more the idea of austerity in India, of tapasya. Not that it's athletic, but the idea is that it's disciplining the mind, disciplining the senses, learning to concentrate the mind, focus all of one's energy, and direct it towards a particular purpose. So just as the athlete practices, controls diet, controls exercise, controls movements and everything else, in order to aspire towards winning the goal in the competition. So the ascetic does the same thing in order to attain the power to pierce through the veils of Maya. So he says, as the Divine Mother practiced austerities in order to attain Shiva. The other thing that we should understand from what he says here is that we have to practice spiritual practice. So yes, they're associated, but tapasya as the means of attaining whatever it is that we want to attain, even if you want to make $1 million or $1 billion nowadays, you have to discipline yourself so much. You have to focus the mind. That's not a very high ideal, but even for such an ideal, you have to focus and concentrate so much in order to get there. And so that's one idea, practicing austerity to attain to a goal. The other is, what Sri Ramakrishna is talking about here, is for attaining love for God. And so the spiritual practice in austerity is for the goal of purifying the mind, concentrating the mind, and leading us towards that realization. So one must cultivate the attitude of Prakriti in order to realize Purusha. Prakriti is nature. As I've explained on other occasions, nature in its most comprehensive sense. That is the very root of manifestation, at all levels of manifestation. That is Prakriti. And so this is taking the terms of Sankhya and of Yoga philosophies, where there are two realities. There's Purusha, the soul, which is pure consciousness and which is infinite. And then Prakriti, all of manifestation, all of objectivity. And so in spiritual life, in the devotional life, we can think that we are Prakriti, that is the power of God, which is seeking to be reunited with the divine itself, with God. So he continues, I saw Sita in a vision. I found that her entire mind was concentrated on Rama. She was totally indifferent to everything, her hands, her feet, her clothes, her jewels. It seemed that Rama had filled every bit of her life, and she could not remain alive without Rama. So he doesn't say whether this is the same vision that he had, because he probably had more than one vision of Sita, certainly had more than one vision of Sita, but he often would speak of a vision of Sita in which he saw this beautiful divine woman walking near the Panchavati, walking towards him with an extraordinary smile on her face, a smile that expressed joy, but also the joy which comes through much suffering. And as she approached him, his pure mind suddenly spoke to him and said, "This is Sita, who focused her whole life on attaining Rama." And then she went and entered into him, merged in Sri Ramakrishna. I used to say that was the first vision he ever had with open eyes. After that, he had many visions with open eyes, but that's a particular type of vision where you see the world as the world is, with the trees and plants and so forth. In fact, as Sita was coming towards him, he saw a monkey come out of nowhere and bow down before Sita, like Hanuman. And so you see the world around you, you see your surroundings, and in the midst of that, you see a divine figure. But your eye is functioning as they normally function. So most visions happen, whether in sleep or in the waking state, when all of this disappears and you see something in an altered state. But Sri Ramakrishna said this was the first vision he ever had with open eyes. And he said that because of that, he said that when Sita merged into him, that she left him her smile. And so the conclusion was that if one saw the smile of Sri Ramakrishna, one knew the smile of Sita. And he said that perhaps because that was my first vision, therefore I have had to suffer so much in my life. Because Sita's life was one of long suffering. Blissful union with Rama, yes, but long suffering to attain to that. He says here about Sita, the vision that he saw, whether it was the same or a different one, that everything about her was focused on Rama. She was forgetful of her hands, forgetful of her feet, forgetful of the jewels, forgetful of everything. Her whole mind was absorbed in Rama. And that Rama filled every bit of her life and every bit of her being. I've told the story on occasion, not for a long time here, but usually I mention it when giving a talk on japa, of a saint who lived in the Himalayas in the 20th century. I don't remember his name, but he was one of the many sadhus who became noted, lived in the Himalayas in the mid 20th century. He used to preach the repetition of the name of God, of Rama. That was the main spiritual practice. There are other things he taught too, but he emphasized repetition of the name of Rama. And so one of his disciples came to him one day and said, Sir, you always tell us to repeat the name of God, to the name of Rama, to identify with the name of Rama. How far can that identification with the name of Rama go? And so then the saint said, well, put your ear to my arm. And so the disciple did and heard Rama, Rama, Ram, Ram, vibrating through the sadhu's arm. And so showing that his whole being, even his physical being, what to speak of his mind, even his physical being was vibrating with the name of Rama. So Sri Ramakrishna says, she was totally indifferent to everything, her hands, her feet, her clothes, her jewels, indifferent to all of it. It seemed that Rama had filled every bit of her life, and she could not remain alive without Rama. M. Yes, sir, she was mad with love for Rama. Master, mad, that's the word. One must become mad with love in order to realize God. But that love is not possible if the mind dwells on woman and gold. Sex life with a woman, what happiness is there in that? The realization of God gives 10 million times more happiness. Gauri used to say that when a man attains ecstatic love of God, all the pores of the skin, even the roots of the hair, become like so many sexual organs, and in every pore the aspirant enjoys the happiness of communion with the Atman, that is, Atmarama, the joy of communion with the Atman. One must call on God with a longing heart. One must learn from the Guru how God can be realized. Only if the Guru himself has attained perfect knowledge can he show the way. So how fortunate were those like him who came to Sri Ramakrishna. That's an extraordinary blessing. A chance one might get once in, a few people get once in 500 years or 1,000 years. A man gets rid of all desires when he has perfect knowledge. He becomes like a child 5 years old. Sages like Dattatreya and Jada Bharata had the nature of a child. So that many people have said, and Sri Ramakrishna would often say, that one has to attain to the nature of a child. And Jesus, of course, in the Christian Bible, he says the same thing. Unless you become like one of these, meaning one of the children that he had gathered around him, one cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. And so the sage becomes childlike. Not childish, but childlike. And so the quality of childlikeness that the sage cultivates, or the sage spontaneously manifests after they attain to a high state, is the natural non-attachment of a child. Now, the child can, in one moment, the child can hold its toy to its chest and not let anybody else play with it, and the next moment he gives it to a stranger. So that spontaneity of the child, the freedom of the child who has no concerns whatsoever. In the child's case, it's because the child knows that mommy and daddy will take care of everything. I don't need to worry about anything. In the case of the sage knows that there's nothing for me in the three worlds to concern myself with. I'm free. Whatever happens to this body, let it happen. And knows also that whatever food, whatever shelter is meant for him, it will come of itself. And so he need not concern himself whatsoever. And so that sense of being unconcerned with anything in the three worlds, that sense of non-attachment that nothing is mine, and the sense of freedom that a child has, freedom from all responsibility. So sages like Dattatreya and Jarabharata had the nature of a child. So Dattatreya is considered sort of the image of the Avadhuta. The Avadhuta means one who is washed completely free of all illusion. And so he is the image of that. And there's a famous mountain in Gujarat. I forget the name of the mountain. Do you remember the name of the mountain in Gujarat that on the top of which Dattatreya is said to have practiced austerities? I know the name of it, but I can't think of it. It's not Mount Abu, which of course is very famous, but it's another holy mountain in Gujarat. Not a very tall one, but a mountain. What's that? Girnath. It may be Girnath, yeah, that may be. I don't remember for sure, but it may be that. I've seen it from the base, but we didn't have time to climb up. And then Jada Bharata was, of course, the famous Bharata, King Bharata, who fell in love with a deer after he'd given up his kingdom, given up his wealth, his power, everything, and went to the forest to practice austerities. He became so attached to a pet deer, the animal, that all he could think about was the deer, and he gave up his meditation and everything else, always thinking about the deer. And then he died, and because of his attachment, he was reborn as a deer and lived a life as a deer. And then when the deer died, he was reborn as the one that is now known as Jada Bharata. Jada meaning unconscious or inert. And so he was called Jada Bharata because he remembered from the time he was in his mother's womb the course of his evolution, how he had been King Bharata, how he had become attached to this deer, how he had to be reborn as a deer, and now he decided, I'm not going to get attached to anything. So from his birth, his mind was focused on non-attachment to everything, and so he wouldn't even speak. So he's called Jada Bharata because even in his childhood and youth, he never uttered a word. People told him to do something. He did it. Just the body did it, but with no attention to anything. So Dattatreya and Jada Bharata had the nature of a child. Well, let me just mention also, Sri Ramakrishna says elsewhere that Paramahamsas often keep children around them in order to emphasize to themselves, sort of as a practice, to imbibe that nature of a child. One hears about them, that is, about these great souls, but there were many others like them that the world doesn't hear about. Master. Yes, the jnani gets rid of all desire. If any is left, it does not hurt him. At the touch of the philosopher's stone, the sword is transformed into gold. Then that sword cannot do any killing. Just so, the jnani keeps only a semblance of anger and passion. They are anger and passion only in name and cannot injure him. So, M first says that there were many others like that the world doesn't hear about, that the scriptures contain the names of a few such great souls, but there were many others. And Sri Ramakrishna says, yes. Swami Vivekananda used to say that the Christs and Buddhas of the world are second-rate heroes, that they were much greater souls than they, who lived and died in obscurity. And so Sri Ramakrishna said yes, and then mentions that the jnani, even if the jnani has some semblance of desire left at times, that's not a serious desire and it does them no harm because their mind has been freed. And perhaps because of prarabdha karma or whatever, there's something left, like King Janaka, the image of the royal sage, the royal king, who was a completely realized soul, lived in the capital city of Videha, which means without a body, because Janaka was without any body consciousness. So he lived the life of a king, and he had his queens and so forth, and yet he was completely unattached to everything, completely free in the midst of his kingly duties and activities. Yes, sir, the jnani goes beyond the three gunas, as you say. He is not under the control of any of the gunas, sattva, rajas, or tamas. All these are so many robbers, as it were. And so here M is referring to the story Sri Ramakrishna tells of the three robbers who highway robbers who catch a man walking through the forest on his way to his home city. And the story is to express the nature of the three gunas, the separate natures of the three gunas, and how all of them, even sattva, bind us. And so that's the reference here, that they are so many robbers, as it were. And the jnani goes beyond the three gunas, as you say. So our Swami Trigunatitanandaji, his name means one who is beyond the three gunas. So Master, yes, one must assimilate that. That is, to be not under the control of any of the gunas. M. In this world, there are perhaps not more than 3 or 4 men of perfect knowledge. So here, for some reason, just above, a moment before, he says, one hears about sages like Dattatreya and Janabharata, but there were many others like them that the world does not hear about. And here he says that in this world there are perhaps not more than 3 or 4 men of perfect knowledge. What he means here is that at any time. So not that he's contradicting what he said above, but that at any one time, perhaps there are 3 or 4 men of perfect knowledge in the world. But Sri Ramakrishna disagrees. He says, why do you say that? One sees many holy men and sannyasis in the monasteries of Upper India, North India. And when you read the life of Sri Ramakrishna, you see so many great souls coming to see him. There are all kinds of people who came to see him, greater and lesser people, but among them were many great souls. And that I have to say that you don't see nowadays in India. There are many who claim to be great souls, but it's hard to find real spiritual greatness in India now. And it's not India's fault, it's the course of history. Swami Vivekananda saw that India would have to go through a period of development, material development, and the desire and consumerism that comes along with that for some time before she would come back to her ancient roots. But come back she would, he knew that this was a necessary stage. And so now it's not as it was in Sri Ramakrishna's time. But here Sri Ramakrishna is disagreeing that there are only 3 or 4 at a time in the world. So then M. Well, I too can become a sannyasi like one of those. Meaning, it doesn't take much to be like a lot of the sannyasis of North India. So the master fixed his gaze on M and said, by renouncing everything, M, what can a man achieve unless he gets rid of Maya? What will a man gain by merely being a sannyasi if he cannot subdue Maya? Both remained silent a few minutes. So, of course, what M says is true, that what can a man achieve unless he gets rid of Maya? What will a man gain by merely being a sannyasi if he cannot subdue Maya? So M had his point, but Sri Ramakrishna had his as well. The idea that you can't limit God's glory, nor can you limit the world to only 3 or 4 illumined souls at one time. There are times when there may be many more. Swami Vivekananda himself said that a time will come when, just as when you start boiling water in a pot, at first one bubble appears, then another bubble, then a couple of bubbles, then another bubble at intervals. But then more and more bubbles start coming until the whole pot is just roiling with bubbles as the water boils away when it's achieved its full heat. And so he said, in the world, you see a Christ here, a Buddha there, a Rama here, a Krishna there. But a time will come when the whole of in humanity, you'll see countless illumined souls arising. And then he says that that will be the sign that things are coming to an end, and then creation will start over again, and new souls will come and begin their progress. But he said a time will come when there will be many, many illumined souls at the same time, all attaining to illumination. He didn't say when. So then the master says, or our M says, "Sir, what is the nature of the divine love transcending the three gunas?" Master, attaining that love, the devotee sees everything full of spirit and consciousness. To him, Krishna is consciousness, and his sacred abode is also consciousness. The devotee too is consciousness. Everything is consciousness. Very few people attain to this love. So here, it's a beautiful passage. Attaining that love, the devotee sees everything full of spirit and consciousness. So that's the height of love. First, we try in the path of devotion to see consciousness, pure consciousness, in one thing, and that is in the Ishtadevata. We try to see consciousness in the higher consciousness in the Ishtadevata. We see it manifested in their activities, in the stories about them, in their words, and so forth. We meditate on them within the heart as conscious and living. And if we have an image, we look on the image as living and treat it as if it's living. So that's trying to find consciousness in one thing. But that is fulfilled, that process is fulfilled when we see not only that, but everything filled with the same consciousness. We see that everything is Satchidamanda Krishna, everything is Satchidananda Shiva, everything is Satchidananda Ramakrishna, Satchidananda Kali. So that's the heights of love. To him, Krishna's consciousness and his sacred abode, Vaikuntha, is consciousness. And this world itself is seen as the abode of Krishna, and it is seen as pure consciousness. So that's the heights of devotion. And then Ramakrishna says, very few people attain to such love. So that's the goal. That's what we want to attain to. But he says very few people attain to that. So if we can see consciousness within the Ishta, then that itself is a high state. And that itself can lead to liberation. As I've said once in a while, not often, but there's a lot of confusion about liberation, enlightenment, self-realization, nirvikalpa samadhi, and all of these things. Liberation itself means that you have broken the bonds of karma and the necessity to take birth again. And so for that, one needs to go beyond the sense of I am the doer. And there are various ways that that can be done. And then one is free. One doesn't have to come back to this world of Maya, confusion, this world of limitation, this world of suffering. But there are higher states than just liberation from the bondage of karma and samsara. There are higher and higher states of illumination. And so, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, quoting a Sanskrit saying, and Holy Mother used to say it also, it's a Vaishnava teaching, that God grants liberation easily, but prema, divine love, that he gives to only a few. So, if we are liberated, we're infinitely blessed, but there are even higher states than that. And so we aim for the highest, as I forget Swami Ramakrishna, I forget who it was, I think it was Swami Ramakrishna said, that aim for the moon, and then you may at least get off of the earth. So aim for the highest, and then you will approximate it. You may not get to the highest, but you'll get somewhere. So don't lower the ideal. Prema Bhakti, yes. So Prema Bhakti, which goes under several other names, Raganuga Bhakti, that's the highest where one loves God just for love's sake. So that like Sri Chaitanya in his Shikshastakam, he says, oh, how I long for the day when an instant separation from thee, O Govinda, will be as 1,000 years, and the world without thee is a heartless void. Prostrate at thy feet let me be with unwavering devotion. And I forget the next words, but whether you come to me or whether you remain separate, It doesn't matter. No, that's not the right expression, because it does matter. He says that I'll burn away with my desire, but that is up to you. That whether you come to me, whether you don't come to me, my love is undying, and that love will remain. So I don't even expect you to give yourself to me, even though that destroys my heart. But my love is so intense that even that, I don't ask anything of you, even your own revelation. So that is the highest love. Dr. Madhu. The love transcending the three gunas means, in other words, that the devotee is not under the control of any of the gunas. Master smiling. Yes, that's it. He becomes like a child 5 years old, not under the control of any of the gunas. So yes, that's the goal, to become Triguna-atit, to go beyond the three gunas, so that we're not controlled by Rajas, by Tamas, by Sattva. So what we have to understand from this, of course, he's speaking of a very high state, the ultimate state. But what we can understand from it is that at present we all are under the control of the gunas. One of the things that's helpful in spiritual life is when we begin to realize how much my life is being controlled by things external to me. So that I'm not thinking that, yes, I'm a free agent, I do whatever I like to do. But no, one moment the mind is tamasic, and I can't think clearly, I can't do things, I don't want to do anything, I just feel, so my mind is being clouded by tamas. The next moment, the mind is overpowered by rajas, and I want to run around and do all kinds of things. And then the mind is sattvic, and I want to think calmly, tranquilly. That, of course, is far better. That's the best of all of the three. But even there, it's because sattva has taken over the mind. It's not because I am free. It's because sattva is directing the mind now, and it's not going to continue. After a while, then tamas comes back, or rajas comes back. And so in all of these, we're cycling every day. We're being controlled by these three gunas. Just to understand that we, how unfree we are right now, gives us the desire to become free, to become spiritually free. And so the sage is not under the control of any of the gunas. Yes, they may still go to sleep. They may be active at sometimes, less active at other times during the day, but that has no control over them. They see that as pertaining to the body and mind, and I'm not the body and mind. And so it doesn't, I am free in the midst of it. I'm the container which is unaffected by whatever happens within the container. Like space, which is unaffected by anything that happens in the world. Even an atom bomb doesn't affect space. All of the nuclear weapons of the US and Russia and China and other countries, they were all to go off at once, and the world were destroyed. Space isn't touched at all. So the realized soul, who is beyond the gunas, is like that. So even if, because of prarabdha karma, their body continues and engages in activities and so forth, they are unaffected by it. They see themselves as the container, and this body, like other bodies, is moving around doing things, but I'm completely unaffected. So it's very helpful to, by thinking about these things and thinking about the nature of a realized soul, it gives us something to move towards. So we can't conceive of it with the human mind as it is, but we can approximate it. We can start thinking that, that is where I want to go. That's where freedom lies, not the freedom to go out and do whatever I want to, whenever I want to, and nobody's going to tell me anything. I'm a free soul in a free country, and nobody's going to tell me anything. Oh, no, that's not where freedom lies. At an ordinary level, that kind of freedom is important. Ordinary people have to have ordinary freedom. Because that, as Swamiji said, that's the condition of growth. But eventually we find that that's not freedom. It may be necessary, for ordinary people to have choices, to be able to make mistakes, to be able to do things freely, express themselves freely, and so forth. But eventually we find no, freedom is somewhere else, and that is here. Now there's a break in time and continue. The master was resting after his noon meal. Mani Malik arrived and saluted him. Sri Ramakrishna remained lying on the couch and said a word or two to Mani. So Mani was one of the devotees that would come sometimes to Sri Ramakrishna, and he was a member of the Brahma Samaj. Mani: I hear you visited Keshav Sen. Master: Yes, how is he now? Mani: He hasn't recovered to any extent from his illness. Master: I found him to be very rajasic. I had to wait a long time before I could see him. So this we read about earlier in this class in the Gospel that came some chapters ago. Sri Ramakrishna's last visit to Keshav, the last time that he saw Keshav. And Sri Ramakrishna knew with his foresight that this would be the last time that he saw Keshav. And he spoke to Keshav very lovingly. But even there you could see that Sri Ramakrishna was not pleased that they made him wait for a long time for Keshav to come. He said, why all of this formality? Why can't I just go in and see Keshav? He's my own. Why can't I just go and see him? But they wouldn't allow it. He will be here soon, sir. So Sri Ramakrishna said that here, he didn't say at that time, but here he says that he saw that even then Keshav was full of rajas. Even though he was so weak, he could hardly walk. He could hardly come into the hall where Sri Ramakrishna met him. He had to hold on to the wall as he went to see Sri Ramakrishna. The master sat up on the couch and continued his conversation with the devotees. So couch, of course, means in his room there were two cots, two beds, not Western-style beds with box springs and a thick mattress or anything, but just more like a bed-sized table, two bed-sized table, one that was higher and a little wider, and one which was narrower and a little shorter. One in front of the other, like so, with a very thin mattress on each, the Indian style mattress. And so Sri Ramakrishna would sit on the lower. So that's what they mean by couch, not that he was on a sofa from gallery furniture or something like that, a velour couch or something. So the master sat up on the couch and continued his conversation with the devotees. Master to him: I became mad for Ram. I used to walk about carrying an image of Ram Lala given to me by a monk. I bathed it, fed it, and laid it down to sleep. I carried it wherever I went. I became mad for Ram Lala. So the image of Ram Lala, meaning the child Rama, the small child Rama, was given to him by a monk from North India who came to Dakshineshwar during Sri Ramakrishna's sadhana period. And Sri Ramakrishna saw the living Ram Lala, and that's a beautiful episode in Sri Ramakrishna's life, where his interactions with the living Ram Lala, where he would take him into the Ganges to bathe him, he would scold him, he would weep when he would give Ram Lala something to eat, and it would cut his gums, the small child and things. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful episode in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, where indeed he took him everywhere with him during that period of his life. The sadhu, the Ram Lala, when the sadhu left, because he said that through Sri Ramakrishna's grace, he had realized his Ishta Devata and he no longer needed the image. The sadhu had carried the image with him all over North India and maybe wider than North India as he went on pilgrimage to various places in India. And worshipped the image every day, prayed to the image, meditated on the image every day. But then, by the grace of Sri Ramakrishna, he too saw the living Ram Lala and saw the living Ram Lala in everything. And so that is when image worship fulfills itself. When you see the reality, and you see that reality everywhere, then what need for an image then? Because you've realized the divine in its infinite nature. So here we come to the end of the day, and so we'll stop here and continue next time with the next day. This was the day we're just completing now was Monday, December 17th. So next class we will begin with Tuesday, December 18th, which starts a new chapter in the Gospel. So let me give announcements, and then if there are any questions, I will answer those, and then we'll have the closing chant. So for announcements, on Sunday, I will speak on the art and science of meditation. And next week, we plan to have the classes on Tuesday and Thursday as usual. The Mundaka Upanishad on Tuesday and this class on Thursday. And then the following weekend, of course, is our big program that we've been announcing for the last month. Swami Sarvadevanandaji, the head of the Vedanta Society of Southern California, the head of this center, will be coming on April 1st, Friday, April 1st. He gets here in the afternoon from Austin, where he will have spent a couple of nights. And we'll have a program on the evening of April 1st, after he gets here, at 7 o'clock in the evening. We'll have Arati at 6:45, and then a program for him at 7 o'clock, where he will speak. It'll be an informal satsang, so we invite you all to come for that. Saturday, April 2nd, he will begin by giving initiation in the morning to those who have already arranged it. And then in the afternoon at 5 o'clock, late afternoon, 5 o'clock, he and Swami Atmarupananda and Pravrajika Brahma Prana. Atmarupananda from Washington, D.C., Pravrajika Brahma Prana from Dallas, they will also be here. And the three of them will speak on meditation. And then Sunday, April 3rd, we have our big inauguration at the new Trinity Retreat, Lone Star over Trinity Retreat in Trinity, Texas. And so we hope that you can come for that. You're all invited. It will begin with worship at 11 o'clock, then lunch a little after 12. Then an introduction of the retreat and our plans for the retreat, what we hope to accomplish, a tour of the property. And then we will have bhajans and talks by the Swamis and the Pravrajika, and a Indian dance recital also by two of our devotees who are accomplished dancers. And so again, from 11 o'clock in the morning to 4:30 in the evening, we hope that many of you can come for that. So those are the announcements for now. Okay, several questions here today. So what is the austerity to practice so that Ramakrishna becomes living reality and relationship in life? It feels the spiritual path is long over lifetimes to attain and feel a living relationship. Yes, spiritual life sometimes feels very long, and it feels like we're not getting anywhere. And so what is the austerity to practice so that Sri Ramakrishna becomes living and our relationship becomes deep? The variety of practices that we all know and hear about, japa and month, meditation, kirtan, prayer, and so forth. All of those are the methods to attain to Sri Ramakrishna. And all of them are trying, all of the spiritual practices we do have two things that we're trying to accomplish through them. One of them is the purification of the mind and heart, and the other is to develop love for the object. In this case, you're speaking of Sri Ramakrishna. Develop love for Sri Ramakrishna, and to orient ourselves, our mind, our hearts, our affection towards Sri Ramakrishna. So everything that helps us in doing that is the appropriate spiritual practice. And yes, it's unavoidable in spiritual life. Unless one is born as a saint already from past lives, then in this life, such people move very quickly towards the goal. But such people are seen very rarely. The rest of us have to do what we can in moving in that direction. And sometimes for years it seems like I'm not getting anywhere. I'm doing the same practice, trying to advance, but nothing seems to be happening. That's an unavoidable part of spiritual life for the great majority of us. And so we just have to persevere. Perseverance is extremely important in spiritual life. As Sri Ramakrishna said, we have to be like the hereditary farmer who goes on sowing the seeds of his crop every year in spite of years of pestilence, years of famine, years of drought, years of the crop being destroyed in various ways. Still, the hereditary farmer goes on sowing seeds because that's what he does. The gentleman farmer who made some money in the city and decides it would be fun to be a farmer buys a piece of land, goes out there and tries farming for 2 or 3 years, has a drought, and gives up. Well, this is no fun, it's just hard work. But the hereditary farmer knows, no, this is what I do. So we have to come to that in spiritual life, where I feel that this is what I do. One day it will be productive. One day I will find God. I can't predict when, I don't know when, but what else am I going to do? What else am I going to do? There's nothing else to do but this. This is the work. This is what I'll do. And so that's a great blessing. And I know that's hard. It's hard for all of us, but we can get there to the point where I just know that this is what I do. And one day it will be effective. It hasn't been yet, but I just do it year after year, day after day, year after year, because there's nothing else to do, nothing else worth doing. When we come to that, then that itself is a blessed stage in the spiritual path, and it will become effective. But one other thing, let me say, is that if doing that, we can come to the point where we realize that time doesn't matter. Time doesn't matter. This is what I do, and one day I'm going to break through, or one day God is going to break through from the other side and reveal himself to me. And I just have to keep going because there's really nothing else to do. And so the very idea of time and how long will it take, how many years do I have to go on doing this, will it happen in this life or in the next life? Once we forget about time, then it's near. So does our rebirth only take place on this planet, or might we take birth in other universes or other spiritual planes? Yes, we can be reborn in other places, in other planes of existence. And if there are other inhabited worlds in this universe, maybe there also, who knows? There's nothing, it would be very strange if in this vast universe, this insignificant Earth were the only place that had conscious life. That would be extraordinarily strange. And so rebirth means we come back. It's not random. And of course, you probably know this, but it's not the idea many people have in the West, where rebirth is random. People say that, well, Hindus don't eat meat, and of course many Hindus do eat meat, which is okay, but people say that the Hindus don't eat meat because they're afraid they might be eating their grandmother. So no, that's not the reason that people who choose to be vegetarian. It's not that they're afraid they're going to be eating their grandmother. So there's nothing random about rebirth, that I'm a human this time, but next time, just because of the shake of the dice, I become a butterfly or something. No. We'll be born where we need to go in order to continue our path, but it can be here, on another plane of existence, or another planet. Sri Ramakrishna had, I'm sorry, I missed one. Is consciousness the same as presence? That is, all that we perceive, and therefore we are always seeing, experiencing pure love in the finite. Yes, it is, but that's very difficult to understand. But if we can begin to understand it, that's a great help. Presence, that is, the feeling of presence, that's a direct intuition of existence itself. When we can feel that everything that is the isness of everything that is. The easiest way to express isness is presence, the presence of everything. That's an intuition of existence itself, pure being. And so if we can feel that, we're intuiting, not yet realizing, but intuiting, which itself is good, the omnipresence of reality, of divine reality. And that eventually we come to see as love, just as everything that we perceive in consciousness. We don't perceive anything outside of consciousness. If you say, well, what about planets where we've never been? If we go to such planets and experience them, where do we experience them? Within consciousness. There's no experience outside of consciousness. And so consciousness is that in which everything exists. And so consciousness, existence, and love eventually are seen to be the same thing. If we can catch any one of them, we begin to feel blessed. Sri Ramakrishna advised householders to not turn all the lights off in the house to attract the goddess Lakshmi. How should we follow this in our house? Should we keep the electric lamp at our home altar turned on at all times? What he didn't think that it was auspicious for the householder to turn off all of the lights all of the time. So of course that doesn't mean leave the light on in your room so you can't sleep. It doesn't even mean that you have to leave the light on in the shrine. But it is good to, at least at night when you turn out the lights and so forth, to leave one light in the house lit, whether it's in the hall, the hallway, or a night light, to leave that in the shrine. So again, it's symbolic. It's symbolic that the light is symbolic of awareness. And so that should always be present. Ideally, how much time should one spend in meditation each day? Also, is it much more beneficial to do it more than once per day? So that depends on one's circumstances. A general rule can't be given for all. And yes, it's good to do some meditation at least twice a day if you can. Some people can't, and that's understood. So do what you can do. It's better to do something every day rather than to do a lot one day and the next day do nothing. So have a minimum that you do every day, even when you're busy. That at least you sit for 5 minutes when you first wake up or before you go to bed, or 10 minutes on the busiest of days. Even on the busiest of days, don't get into bed without sitting, gathering your thoughts, directing them towards God for a little bit. Admittedly, there are times when you'll be very, very busy, and even that's hard to do. But at least crawling into bed, focus your mind on God. But in normal times, even when you're normally busy, not extraordinarily busy, but normally busy, keep at least one time a day when you spend some time in meditation, and have a minimum amount of time that you do on a normal day. And when you have more time, do more. But ideally do 2 times a day. And so some people, they may be able only to do 15 minutes a day. So do 15 minutes a day. Some people may be able to do 15 minutes twice a day. Some people may be able to do half an hour at a time. Some people may have an hour that they can do. So find a time which is that you can do consistently. And then when you have time and inclination, do more than that. But what you do every day is more important than what you do once in a while. So that will close. I'll give the closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhrita Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow in adoration to Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, eternal, infinite, the worshipful Supreme Lord who took human birth out of compassion for all. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all.